education budget. We'll get started since it's 1:30. I'll stay on task. Are there any requests for bill introductions? Any requests for bill introductions? Okay, if not, Trevor, are there any members on WebEx? Thank you. We'll get started with today's topic of presentations. In the world of higher education, one of the subsets field of study is engineering, and the Board of Regents has identified that as a need and priority, and in their building a future plan, it includes the University Engineering Initiative. And today we'd like to hear from presenters about how they utilize that initiative, that state support, and also what their needs are in terms of workforce in the field of engineering. So to get started with today's presentation, we'll hear from Brianna Horton, fiscal analyst with the Kansas Legislative Research Department. So Brianna, the floor is yours.
Representative. Is it on? It's on. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, committee. I'm just going to give you guys a brief overview of the University Engineering Initiative Act. You have these 3 handouts, which I'm going to be working through, and I'll let you know what I'm talking about and where the information is coming from as I'm talking. So we're going to start with this one, with the Board of Regents. So the UEIA, it's abbreviated, was passed May 25th, 2011, providing $105 million to 3 schools over a 10-year period. That is K-State, KU, and Wichita State. Each school is given $3.5 million per year. These funds are from the Expanded Lottery Act revenues, which is not state general fund. The schools have met and exceeded the goal of graduating 1,365 students by 2021. The UEIA authorized the board and universities to acquire and construct equipped engineering facilities on state-owned property for purposes of educating engineers upon consultation with the Joint Committee on State Building Construction. So that's just a little background. Blake Flanders gave testimony in March and February in the House of Representatives and Senate Ways and Means in support of House Bill 2101 that would reauthorize the UIEA for another 10 years. I am going to move on to this document right here and give a little background on the funding. K-State spent $45 million on the engineering complex addition, which was constructed to accomplish the goals of the UEIA with the goal of increasing the annual number of engineering graduates in the state by 56% in 2021. The College of Engineering at Kansas State University has the largest undergraduate engineering enrollment in the state and was previously at capacity for facilities and faculty. KU has spent $4.4 million. There is a handout that shows the salary in the data. It is, sorry, I'm switching again. This document here shows the salaries in the data. And 42% of graduates stayed in Kansas initially after graduating. Let's see, on page 3 of this handout, it also shows the average wages, which in 2019 was about $56,000 and then $62,000 in Missouri. And then you have this handout, which is the most recent, that has the Engineering Initiative Act scoreboard and it was printed December 2022, so. I know there was a lot of paper and a lot of information, just trying to give you a quick overview, so I will stand for any questions.
Any questions from the committee for Brianna? Yes, Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3 of this report.
This one.
It talks, maybe I'm reading this wrong. The average wages in Kansas by graduation year, it had 2012, it was 92,000. 2019, it was 56,000.
I'm sorry. Can you point to, and sorry, page 3. Okay. Can you ask again? Sorry, I just need to catch up to where you are.
I read this right. It has graduation year of 2012. The average wage was 92,000, but in 2019 it was 56,000.
This is the data that I have. I can follow up if you want something more specific on that.
I just think they're just
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the previous question, I believe that is likely because the folks who graduated in 2012 have been in the field for 7 years versus the people from 2019 had been in the field 1 year. This would be my guess for that data.
Thank you.
Brianna, could you double check with the Board of Regents to see if they would have any more information that would kind of talk about that range? Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Brianna? I did have one, and it may be something that the universities could answer when they come before the committee. But how do the universities match the state investment for the university engineering initiative? So it wasn't clear to me. I think that was part of the requirement when it was enacted in 2012.
I'm not sure. I will look into that, and if the universities do not answer, I'll follow up with you for sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Brianna. We appreciate it. First on the agenda, we have Dr. Matt O'Keefe with Kansas State University, and welcome to the committee. Glad to have you here. Yeah, just make sure the blue light's on.
Light. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, and I appreciate that. I'll say this as I go through this and our impact on Kansas, and knowing that workforce is the most important one. What you're going to hear today from me predominantly is going to be about students. It's student success that really matters. My first mentor in academia walked in and said, "Matt, you take care of the students, everything else falls in place." And so I think that's a good premise for doing that. So if I could have the next slide. Always like to talk about what things are going well. Always like to start all my meetings with good news. So we'll start with the good news and what's going on. For Kansas State University, as Brianna had mentioned earlier, in ours, we are the largest undergraduate program, engineering program in the state. And we continue to be, historically have been, and are as of right now. So that's where we would say we're the #1 choice for students. I would note right under that in our case, 80% of our undergraduate population and students are from Kansas. So they are Kansas residents. And so from that standpoint, we also have, and if you look at the UEIA scorecard, we have the largest number of in-state students currently studying engineering. And to that, we also turn around and more of our students stay in the state than anyone else on a total number value. And so that's one of the things that certainly as we go through this and discuss with that, where do the students go? I know we've had discussions, and certainly Lieutenant Governor Tolan, we had a meeting with him, the other KU, K-State, and Wichita State deans just a couple weeks ago, recognizing that keeping the talent in the state is a very high priority. And certainly I'll describe some of the things that we're doing to do that, but we're very pleased to be able to do that. I will point out, and I think this will be a recurring theme, it probably can't be said too soon or too often, the demand for engineering talent right now is at its highest I have ever seen. And I'm coming up, I apologize on 40 years of being an engineer. It is really, really competitive. And so when we talk about talent, and that's talent not just within the state, that's talent within companies looking for each other. Something unprecedented. It's anecdotal, but it's interesting. Something happened last semester during recruiting season that's never happened before in my time. We had some companies come in and they said, we need engineers. And we often say, what type of engineer? And they said, we don't care. We just need an engineer and we'll figure out how to work from there. They're looking for critical thinking skills. They're looking for somebody who's had calculus, thermodynamics, all the basics, and they'll take it from there. That's something that I've never seen. At Kansas State, we do have 14 undergraduate degree programs, 11 master's programs, and 8 doctorate. Across the board, every one of those can be placed. If there's a student, and I'll talk about it here, if we could have the next slide as we work through, placing of those has really become tremendously competitive. And the way that it's changed over the last couple of decades is that internships have become essentially extended interviews. The companies are getting the students when they are freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and then trying to get and see if they're a good fit for their company. Are they productive? Do they meet the culture? Is this a good, going through? And then they're trying to hire them even before they graduate. Many of ours, whether it's K-State or any engineering school, probably actually in the country, many of our seniors already have jobs or job offers before they start their senior year. And in fact, the companies like to have that. The companies talk about a conversion rate. And in their case, a conversion rate is how many of their interns they can turn into full-time employees. The really good companies have above 90%. And that's something, and increasingly that's going it. So when we talk about internships, please be aware, this is really part of the recruitment process for companies. This is part of being able to get their workforce to be able to do that. So that is where it is. And in our cases, I'll show you some of the numbers, and I'll show you numbers that came off of our UEIA scorecard at the end. But to set that up as we go through, the internships, we have more than any in the state. We were very intentional about that early in UEIA. It's a part of being able to do that. And again, I think that's part of getting students to be successful, them, to be able to place them, to be able to have them get their first choice. Just came in literally this week, what the average starting salary, we were talking about that. It's really going up. It is incredibly competitive. This number, 68,000, is a self-reported for Kansas State students that graduated this last year. The sample size is 450 or so. So this is a very large. On the low end, it's about 45,000. On the high end, it was $115,000 for a bachelor's degree. So there's quite a range in there. So you have to disaggregate it. But one of the things that's definitely going up, and we hear very often from the companies, is that being competitive and being the starting salaries is part of that. And that becomes then into what area you're at, cost of living, and everything that goes to that. So it's a factor. I will say, again, anecdotal, we've started asking our students recently this last year, why did you pick the job you did? Because before we just asked, do you have a job? Where is it? And how much did you get paid? So now we're trying to understand. For our students, the number one reason they picked a particular company was their culture. Second was their starting salary and benefits, but they really felt like, and so that's some of the things that we have to be aware of as we always talk about different generations getting through the program. We're now at millennials and going into Gen Z. Being a part of the right company and having them feel like that their values and priorities align is a really important for why they even pick what they do. So that's something to be aware of. If I could have the next slide, please. So as an indication of where this workforce and demand is, I'll just give you some information here, both related to our University Career Fair. The University Career Fair is held at Bramlage Coliseum, our basketball arena, in September. And then there's 3 days of it. And the last day, the third day, is the one that's focused on engineering. So in looking at those numbers and looking at the total number of companies that were there, 385 companies came, 188 of them were looking for engineering degree or computer science. And I should add that computer science is including in that. And then if you look at the numbers of the students that attended, half of them were out of our college alone. Engineering talent really, truly, and competition for recruitment brings a lot of people to that, to the campus. One of the things we weren't sure of, and interesting for this, was post-pandemic. Obviously, most of that was done virtually the last couple of years, and we weren't sure were companies going to come back, where they want to do that. Absolutely. They much like I think we're all better in person. We get that in-person feel. And so there's really a hybrid. They'll come in person, and then they'll do a lot more of the actual interviewing. They'll do that virtually, especially if they have multiple locations. Then they can interview and do that. I will point out we have another at K-State. We have our own engineering career fair just in engineering, and that's going to happen next month, the middle of the month. The 148 companies is 148 because that's all the fire marshal would allow us to have in the building. And we've limited them to one table and only 4 recruiters each because we had so many people that asked. And that's actually using some of our overflow. We have an atrium that we built with UEIA money. Thank you so much for that. But that's still it. And keep in mind, again, just a reminder, most of those are actually coming for internships because, again, they do a lot of their full-time offers after they've had internships. It's not exclusive, but it is. So that's an indication of where we're at. You can have the next slide then. This next slide is one that is not mine. It comes from the National Science Foundation. This is a public website, and you can go to it. And if you're not familiar with it, maybe some of the staff are. It has a tremendous wealth of knowledge related to workforce, especially as it goes to the technologies. And this is all sortable by state. So you can pick out from here, I'll just talk about the website. You can pick out what you want to do. In this case, I picked engineers as a % of all occupations, right? And so this is compiled by National Labor Sources and NSF. So it's not any of our data, and so it's all compared to the different ones. So as you look here, for engineers only, they've gone, over the time of 2003 to 2020, it's gone up from about 1.1% to about 1.28% in terms of total number of engineers of all occupations. If you then pull out, which is what I did, pulled out the one for Kansas only. And again, you can do it for all the states. You can see what everybody does. Interesting that in 2003, Kansas was well above the average, right? There was a high number of percentage of engineers employed compared to the, and then as it went down, you can see where, and this was part of the original reason for UEIA, we don't have enough engineers. We need to get more. We need to graduate more. And so that started in 2012, 2011, it was approved. 2012, the money began, the facilities started to. So that's the first cohort. If you go 4 years ahead and start to see what numbers are going to be graduating from that, it actually begins to increase, which I would say from just a pure numbers and data analysis, UEIA worked, right? You could say you don't know what would happen if you hadn't done it, but clearly there was a downward slope that went up. If you look at what the other states did on this website, I don't know of another one that has a change in the slope where it's coming back. In other words, they were high and stay high, they're low and stay low. Kansas is one that starts high, goes down, and is now coming back up. Certainly one of the things we'll look toward is, can we go above that line again? And that's a combination. It's how many we can graduate, how many you can keep, how many jobs are available. So it's a really interesting one. You can spend a lot of time on it, but very, very good information, and also very much agnostic. It's done by others, so you can't do that. If we then look and go back, thank you, in particular to what UEIA has done for K-State. And we can go through, but the total students enrolled, if you look at the numbers, we're actually slightly down, which is again characteristic of K-State. We all have a challenge in higher education to try to keep our enrollments up. Ours have been dropping, but if you look in our case for doing purposeful recruitment, our actual number of enrolled Kansas residents is increased over that time. And that's something that, again, we've been very mindful, in part because our non-residents have gone down. And in part, and there's pluses and minuses. We're just giving the first and kind of the most recent year here, but that's it. The number of engineering graduates, as Brianna mentioned, that was exceeded a few years ago. We have graduated over 600 the last 4 or 5 years. Right? So that has been very successful. But please note that that's a higher completion rate, which really at the end of the day, I think is what we're talking about. How many can you get to graduation? So there's a lot of things that went into making that possible. Again, if you look, we have over 100 more that are employed in the state, right? When we have a higher number. That engineering wage, as we're talking, those are the starting wages. And I believe you're correct. I think that they were talking about what their wage is 7 years out, and that's why it's higher in comparing it to Missouri. So I've seen that. And again, so now that's a number. And please be aware, these are KBOR numbers. So this is right off of the scorecard. You can go right down. KC metro area, there's more scholarships. You asked the question, where does the scholarships come from? Where does our matching? So in order to get UEIA funding, 3.5 million, we're obligated to match at 3.5 million. We greatly exceed that, all 3 universities. So 2 main components there. One is philanthropic scholarships. That goes directly. And I can say, at least from K-State standpoint, we actually exceed 3.5 million just with the money that we're able to give out through scholarships through our foundation. The other aspect is predominantly the scholarships that come out of our central reserve or for, out-of-state tuition that we waiver. So that has to be accounted for. So as you increase the number of students, typically you'll have a greater number of scholarships that go out. There's some other things that go into it, but most of that money is in fact from scholarships or discounted rates for tuition. Again, those internships, that's a number. There's a couple of things. It goes from 200 to 600. At one point, we actually had 1,000 right before the pandemic. It went down a little bit over the pandemic. Part of that is probably, there were probably more back in 2013. We didn't do as good a job of capturing who was actually going on an internship, but it is now for engineering, and I literally say this to students if they don't, do you have an internship on your resume? Because if you don't, or an experiential, some kind of experiential learning where you went to a company or you did something, that's a red flag for recruiters. Why don't you have that? So this has now become an integral part of, again, doing that from the students. Again, internships in Kansas has gone up greatly. The number of Kansas companies offering internships. And then again, we're very fortunate, certainly at K-State and at the other universities as well, to have very excellent philanthropic support to be able to make a lot of this possible. Can't get around the fact that a big part of what we do and how we recruit at this point is that net cost is a high value to the students and their families as to where they choose to go to school. And in particular, I know for us in engineering, that was one of the things this past year. We changed our scholarship program at K-State around. We intentionally went after more in-state Kansas students. We offered them additional scholarships than we had before. And we were able to see a 15% increase in the number of in-state students that enrolled this first time. So that's freshmen and transfers. So I think we all have gotten used to shopping on our phone. We all know how to get the best deal wherever it is. And I think that's gone over as well into higher ed. And we have to be competitive now. And that's where we did. And we can see the benefits of doing that. So if I could have the last slide here with data and stuff to it. So we have a 90% career placement rate currently. That's across both bachelor's, master's, and PhDs, actually. 2%, 1% are still trying to find themselves. They literally say that. They're not sure what they want to do. And 2% just don't want to take a job because it's not where they want it. There is, again, more demand to do that. Again, another anecdotal. We had a company call us in November that wanted to come recruit to hire students by the end of December. They wanted them on rolls by the end of 2022. And we said, you're welcome to come, but I don't think we have any students left because everybody has a job already. So that's the kind of things going through that. Certainly the one thing that I haven't probably mentioned and want to make sure I do is the top employers. Some of these top employers that you see here when they do that, whether it's Burns and Mac or Garmin or Great Plains, they've often been for us our company of the year. We have a company of the year program. Currently it's Great Plains. They do a great job. They hire interns. They hire a lot of our students. They do research with them. It's truly an encompassing thing. But when I show you these, when they're our top employers, they'll graduate or they'll employ approximately 10 to 15. They're on the high end. We placed 600 students last year. It was 308 different companies. So again, when we talk employers and we do that, we have engagement all across the spectrum, but we're really pleased for those that are able to come in and do that. So with that, that's kind of an overview of how we do student success and the things. I'd be happy to take any questions or comments that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. O'Keefe. Questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Doctor. Very good. I'm impressed. Do the students get credit hours for their internship?
They do not for an internship. They can for a co-op. An internship for engineering is typically going to be in the summer. And so they're a full-time employee of that. If it's a co-op during the semester, then they can get credit for that.
I've had friends that graduated from engineering school at K-State, and I know it's a very intense program. Can you tell me the difference? I know it's easy to put engineering on the end of a degree. Pitt State's and proud of their engineering. What's the difference between an engineering degree at Pitt State, say K-State?
Probably within engineering, it's a question, is it an engineering degree or an engineering technology degree? And so that, and to cut to it, it's really whether you have to take a lot of calculus and not. And calculus based is different. So even our physics and engineering, we have an ABET as our accreditation organization. And so then they'll decide whether that's an engineering or an engineering technology degree. And typically it does go to that, plus some other things that factor in. But really it's the math, physics, and chemistry and what the basis is of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the outcomes impact slide that you presented. And my question is, when I'm looking at total student enrolled versus engineering graduates, I'm sure, of course, there are more enrolled because you only graduate every 4, 5, 8 years, depending how long you're there. The question I have is this starting us when you're a freshman and you say that you want to be an engineer, or is this how many are enrolled in the program? That's a 2-year program after you already have your gen eds out of the way. What are those? Because I'm just trying to fully understand.
No, it is from freshman time, those who have declared to have engineering as their major. So those are the ones that we count from.
So to follow up on that, do you see a lot of students who come and say that I want to be an engineer, and then when it's time to get into the program, it's difficult, or they came in? I mean, I went to Fort Hays triple majoring. I can tell you that did not happen. So my question is, what's kind of the process, and what are you seeing from students?
That's an excellent question, and yes, so we put in at K-State about 6 years ago a selective admission program where it said these are the sorts of things that you need to have, and these are sort of the scores that you have to have on placement tests in order to be admitted to the program. Because to yours, there were a lot of students at that time that were showing up that once they got there realized we didn't want to be an engineer, and then they were transferring out. So some of our numbers 6, 7 years ago show the peak enrollment. Now what we're trying to do is a much better job up front of saying, here's what you need, here are the basics, here are it. And we've instituted some things. We try to keep every engineering declared major that we can, because again, we don't have enough for everyone. So if you look at those numbers, what you'll see is actually we're much more efficient, much better at getting them through. So we lose less students. Our retention rate now is over 80%. It used to be 65%. So back to yours, part of it was probably students that didn't want to be there. Part of it was students probably that shouldn't have been there in the first place. They probably really didn't have the need. So in a recruitment and enrollment, we try to make it up front to do that. I will say, at least at K-State, even for engineering, the student that tends to come in as a freshman as an engineer is probably a little bit more of a serious student about going to college. So our retention rate on campus is 91%. So if they don't stay in engineering, they do stay in college and tend to get their degree. So that's part
of it. Next question, Representative Woodard.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Dean, for being here. You mentioned the Lieutenant Governor's focus on keeping students here in Kansas, and I know that's a priority of all of us, which we want to make sure. But how do we do that and achieve that while also still not penalizing students for going into programs? Some of your top employers, Burns and Mac, Black and Beach, Garmin, Hewitt in my backyard, and Lenexa, have fantastic rotational programs. So how are we factoring that in, where hopefully they end up back here, but part of what makes these companies really great for your students that are graduating is those rotational programs?
Right, and that's part of the internship and learning what the companies offer. And the successful companies are the ones that come and are present and explain what their expectations are and what their, in that case, the larger companies can do rotations, right? Smaller companies, that is more of a challenge. We certainly try to make sure that the students are aware of that. And you bring up a good point, which is really always a challenge. They may start in Kansas and they may rotate out, and then they may come back. And in some cases, they rotate out immediately. It may be a Kansas located company, and then they go somewhere else and then come back. It's difficult to track that, quite truthfully, of knowing where someone is. I will say, post-pandemic, there's also some things that are going on you're probably aware of. So much more of engineering is done digitally. It's now done remotely. Just again, as an anecdote, I saw one of our alumni who's been out for a number of years, one of our younger alumni, so he's probably less than 30, an engineer who was working in Kansas in Manhattan and for a company. And I saw him, I said, "Oh, you still working?" "No, I'm working for another company." I said, I'm not familiar with that company." He goes, "Well, they're in Houston." Houston where? "Texas." And I said, "Where are you living?" He goes, "Here." He liked Manhattan. He wanted to stay in Manhattan. And now he's got a job that he works. I said, how are you doing that?" And he said, "Well, I got the guy in Houston likes to go out to the field. He likes to see the material. He likes to check on it. I like doing the back room sort of things. I like doing the design, the project management, and all of that." So back to yours, it's actually becoming difficult to even know what a rotation is and where they're located. So it's interesting. It's really is evolving too.
I wanted to ask you, Dr. O'Keefe, regarding the workforce and how that's changed. So in 2012, when this initiative was enacted, have the reasons changed, at least in industry, of why we need engineers from 2012 to 2023? Are there some different pulls within industry for those engineers?
From my perspective, and we all have observed over that time, the world's more technical than it was 10 years ago, right? Think about the technology that we had even on a smartphone 10 years ago, the evolution. Think about, everything is now GPS, right? And located and going through that. And perhaps even the pandemic pointed that out with supply chains and everything that, technology is an aspect of doing all of that. Whether it's the technology that you need to be able to build something, or it's the technology you need to work across a global scale. I think that the demands are just growing, and that's the way society is. So, but that's kind of my perspective. I'm always happy to hear what others say.
Are the students that are coming in as freshmen from in-state, are they are they ready to jump into engineering at K-State, or are you seeing the need for more remedial education?
Back to the question about, do they come in as freshmen and do that? In our particular case, they're ready to go. We have instituted a common first semester for most of our degrees so that they can begin their adjustment. Intellectually, they are. Emotionally, sometimes, or maturity wise, that's sometimes the things you need to learn how to study. You need to learn how to do some life skills. But for our standpoint, we're still retaining and keeping most of them. I think maybe the other side to yours, some of the demand is also because, and we're all aware of this, there's fewer students that are going into engineering right now, and there's fewer students that are going into higher ed, right? That's an aspect. I think the state, quotes, I know our President Linton says 44% of students in Kansas intend to go on to four-year education. That's an aspect. If there's one thing that we have, as I say, we don't have a quality problem, we have a quantity problem. We don't have enough that we're able to produce. And part of that is really a pipeline. I mean, back to yours, we need to start at a much younger age, probably middle school, to begin to say, these are what technology, computing, these are the things you can do. And I think, in particular, this generation, I frame it as how do you make the world a better place? It's not just the math and science. It's how do you take on climate change? How do you make clean water? How do you make an autonomous vehicle that is safe enough for all of us to drive? That's the way we'll make the improvements, and hopefully get more people, male, female, and all walks of life interested in being an engineer and computer science.
Is there anything above and beyond what the legislature is doing right now, or the state of Kansas, that could help improve what you do at Kansas State University in attracting and promoting engineering?
I think as I just said, it's attracting. We're all kind of trying to get to the same students, right? They're high achieving, interested in technology. How do we keep those in the state? That's one of the things that we did when we changed, quite truthfully, when we looked at some of the demographics and who we were losing students to and where they're going. A number of them were going to out of state. And in that case, they were going out of state again because they were getting a better scholarship program, or I think the facilities that we have are competitive. We always need to improve. That's a technology. It's an arms race to a certain extent. We have great faculty. We have very dedicated staff. We need to be competitive on the side of being able to offer, you know, a cost-effective education that certainly, as they see, if you can get through it, you got a job and you have a lot of great opportunities for a great career.
Thank you, Dr. O'Keefe. Any other questions before our next presenter? Well, thank you for appearing before the committee. If we have any follow-up questions, I think we have your contact information, so we'll be in touch.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome to the committee Andy Schlapp from Wichita State University. Thank you and welcome to the committee.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Chairman Howe and members of this committee. If we can, as we were talking in your office about this, I really wanted to focus on workforce, and I know we're talking about engineering today, so I will stay engineering focused. But honestly, from Wichita State's perspective, that's kind of where we are and what we do. I don't know if you guys have read the latest issue of Forbes magazine, but in that Forbes magazine, they rated the top 20 R&D engineering universities in the country. And for the first time, Wichita State is now number 20 on that list, doing $174 million in research and R&D in engineering. You'll see in this presentation that this year we'll go over 270 million. So we're expecting to be up in hopefully the top 10 of the major universities in this country doing R&D for engineering. So pretty exciting times. If we could turn to page 5 of my presentation, I want to talk about the innovation ecosystem. When we first started talking about this engineering expansion grant and the renewal, it was really what you kept hearing over and over again is we need to grow the economy. We need to have jobs for our people. But the other thing we're really dealing with, and we talked about it, is where's that talent pipeline coming from? And I just want to give you some perspective. Kansas every year graduates about 33,000 seniors, ready? And some of them go on to college. In Texas, that number's 350,000. So again, as you start looking at Kansas and trying to fill this talent pipeline, you're going to realize that you're not going to fill that talent pipeline from who's in Kansas. You're going to have to bring people here. And when you bring them here, you're going to have to expose them to Kansas companies and have them stay here. And hopefully, as we have this conversation, I'll show you how we're doing that. But the second thing we really have to think about is there's about, in Sedgwick County, I have this number just because that's where I live, 17% of our population is between 25 and 35 and have a high school degree or less. So that's about 85,000 students, right? 17%. If we just assume that's true around the state of Kansas, that's about 500,000 people in Kansas that are in that same situation. If we can start to figure out how to capture some of them, not all of them, but some of them who never thought about going to school and figure out how to get them to school, and show them what's out there for them, we think we can make a difference too. So as we start talking about talent, those are really the two pots that we're looking at Wichita State to look at. So on this graph, the first thing, again, as we were talking about, the engineering expansion grant comes out of what are we doing to grow the economy? Where are we getting workforce? And the key really for me is when Dr. Bardo came here and he said, you know, the problem is we don't have enough companies here. We graduate fabulous talent. But if there's not companies here for our students, they're not going to wait for a company to come here. They're going to go find a job and they're going to leave. So we need to be focused on what companies we can get to Kansas. But for an entry-level job, that's great, but they have to have a career too, right? We talked about some of these students need to move away, and that's great, right? We have a lot of multinational companies in Kansas. They're going to leave, but if they can have a career and be back in Kansas, that's really what we're looking for. So in order to do that, where do we focus? And then how do you get them to move to Kansas? And really the key is, and I'll spend some time talking about this today. If I run out of time or I get going too long, just start asking questions and kick me out of here because I'll get going, is infrastructure, right? Business is going to come to a place that can do business cheaper than it can anywhere else. And the only way Kansas is going to attract business here is if they invest in the infrastructure that allows business to do this. So really the purposeful act we made at Wichita State is what is the infrastructure we need to focus on and build so companies want to be here. The problem with incentives are if you bring company A in and you give them money to be here, which I'm not saying is a bad way to do business. If they decide to leave, all the money, talent, and infrastructure you paid to that company goes with that company. If you invest in infrastructure and company A comes in because they like that infrastructure and they leave, then infrastructure stays in Kansas. Company B, company C can come. So that infrastructure becomes critical in what we're trying to do. The next thing that I thought was fascinating when we first, again, been here too long, when this engineering bill first came out and was under Senator Brownback, and he went to Wichita and he invited all these engineering CEOs and everything to this room, and he said, here's what we're doing. Isn't this great? And they all said, no, it's not great, because we need more than engineers. They have to have this skill set. And for us to hire, they need to have this skill set. So we kind of took a step back and said, you know what? Let's start talking to these companies and find out what they need. Because what they were saying is WSU is going to produce great engineering talent. So's Auburn, right? So's Missouri, because you guys are all accredited. They're all engineers. We need this other skill set. So how then can we work with industry to develop programs that give them the skill set that then they would be hired for? And then really then is where do you find that talent pipeline? And I talked about that a little bit with two pieces. The last thing we did that I think is unique at our university is we started an applied learning program. And the applied learning program is more than an internship and it's more than a co-op. They're all fabulous. We can show you data that says the more time you spend with a company, the quicker you are profitable to the company, the less training that company has to give you, that can start to save the company money. We actually start looking for jobs for our freshmen, sophomores as they come in, and place them in these engineering companies, and they can work there 1, 2, 3, 4 years. The good news is if they want to do an internship while they're working for that company, they can. If they want to do a co-op while they're there, they can. But more importantly, they're actually working at that company in real work. And we have a program manager that goes in. Those employees stay hired through the university. So it's not like these companies have to hire these students. So like if I went to work for an engineering firm and they said, Andy's not very good, but we only hired him for a year. So just put him over in the corner and he can take the trash out and he can redo file cabinets and all this stuff. And, he can put that on his resume. Well, that doesn't help me and it doesn't help the company. So that's why we bring in the talent, and then you can have a conversation with us and say, hey, Andy's not working out. Tom Sawyer is great. So, right. So Tom's going to stay. They're going to pull me out and then they're going to tell me, hey, here's the struggles you had. We're going to find you another job and get you going again. So it's a really good model of getting people in. And what we found is even companies who have said, we want to be part and help students have come work for us, but we're not going to hire any of them when they graduate. Just, we're not growing. We find out that actually they end up hiring about 85% of the people that work for them. Because once that company finds out that that student has a good work ethic, but more importantly, fits the culture of that company, why would you go out and try to greenfield another engineer? You want that person. So what really starts to happen is these students end up getting jobs and they find places for them because that student had a 2, 3, 4 year interview with that company. So that circle then goes back to that's how we're growing the economy. So we talk about what we're doing at Wichita State. That is really our focus, right? Yes, there's a lot of scholastics go into it, but what's that infrastructure we can create that brings companies here? How do we then talk to those companies and develop programs? And I will tell you, we've developed more programs in the last 3 years than we did in the previous 50, because the needs of the workforce is different today than it was. Where are we finding that talent pipeline? And then how do we get applied learning into those students? If you turn to the next page on my slide, talks about infrastructure. And in the beginning, I wanted to talk about all the different, we had the Industrial Revolution, we're in this digital world. I wanted to show how Kansas participated. But I stopped and I said, this is fascinating to me. And this really, to me, defines why infrastructure is so critical to what we're doing. So here we are in Kansas. The Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad gets built. And for the first time, there's infrastructure that can bring people to Kansas. I'm from New York, New Jersey. There's farming there, believe it or not. But there's also a lot of trees and a lot of rocks. And I don't know how these people remove trees and rocks from this land that then make it farmable. So those same people are moving through the Midwest and they come to Kansas, no trees, no rocks. And now there's infrastructure that allows them to get here and move product, right? So if you go to the next slide, you're going to see what happens to Kansas. Kansas goes from having almost nobody living here to 3% of the US population. And since 1890, the percent of US population in Kansas has been declining. Because what happened is The infrastructure needs were met very quickly. They saw it, people moved here, they started farming the property. Agriculture is still a huge piece, but it's not a growing place where there's more and more jobs, right? So ag's still important, but what's happening, the rest of the country is moving because they're investing in other infrastructure, and we're declining. We're 0.89% of the US population. Again, we're bigger than we were in real people, but we're not growing at the rate that the rest of the country is growing. And in fact, we're decreasing faster now today than we ever have. So the question becomes, what is the infrastructure we need to invest in so that we can grow this economy? If you go to the next page, these are the clusters that we identified that are the major clusters in Kansas, and especially in South Central Kansas. So much of that is ag focused, or excuse me, engineering focused, and that really is kind of what we do. If you look at those first three, that's what the National Institute for Aviation Research, I have some slides on that, but I think we're going to talk next week, and we'll come back and talk more about what our research portfolio is. But we talked to all these companies, and we said, what do you need, right? And everyone always says, when you talk to a company, they think taxes are too high and regulations are too hard. And that's true if you're dealing in an old environment where you're a commodity and every little bit matters. But when you start talking about this new economy, we're in this digital transformation world that we're in, every single one of those clusters say, we don't know what modern technology to invest in that's going to allow us to be competitive in this new world. And when we make that investment, where's the workforce? Because we don't have it. And where are we going to get it? So again, just if we can turn to the one that says talent pipeline, I think it's 2 or 3 slides. One more. Yeah, right here. Just to bring that point home, for the last 40 years, and I can tell you for people that are in Wichita, our economy's been stagnant since about 1980 because we're manufacturing centric, right? And manufacturing, just like ag, it's huge. It creates tremendous amount of wealth to the state, but it's not creating a lot of jobs. Every job since 1979, every net new job in America, every one of them has been in technology. Doesn't matter the industry, right? Ag's important. What's happening in ag is it's moving to a digital world. Energy, oil and gas, and all of this stuff, it's moving to a digital world. I have a friend that goes out every day to a derrick, right? He has to check 30 derricks, make sure they're not leaking. What happens if the one that's leaking is the 30th one he chose to look at that day, right? He's got a major problem. What if you had sensors on every one of those oil wells? And you could sit at home and see what's happening and know where the problem is. Just my point being is every industry is being affected by this. And if every job is in this area, this is where we need to focus. And again, if you go back to the engineering expansion grant, that's why that's so critical, because so many of these people we're talking about are going to be in those fields. Next slide. Here's what Wichita State is. This is what we do every day when we get up. We're an urban public research university that solves community problems. So what are we doing to help the talent pipeline? What are we doing to help these companies solve problems? And really what's I think is so important is getting those companies involved with our researchers so they can start to use all the new equipment and technology and see what's the best investment for them. Next slide. Just, again, not to spend a whole lot of this, we have more manufacturing jobs than anybody in the country in our region of the state. It goes between us and Youngstown. That's a good and bad thing. We need to diversify from that, but manufacturing is a nice place to be. We rank #1 in manufacturing jobs, number 3 in industry hotspot. We have more STEM jobs per capita than any other city in America. All gets back to this is why these engineering and technological degrees are so important to what we do. And if you go to the next slide, I think this is really where we do not want to lose this. This is our focus every day. We are number 3 per capita in number of engineers. So #1 is San Jose, right? And that's software engineers. #2 is Houston, petroleum and chemical engineers, and we're number 3. And if you look at 3, 4, and 6, those are all aviation manufacturing centric. And so there's competition for the people we have all the time. And we know that if we have the engineering talent here, then new projects and new startups can come here as well, because those tend to locate by where the engineers are. Next slide, when we talk about the talent pipeline, We offer in-state tuition along the I-35 corridor, now the I-70 corridor, and now the I-80 corridor. And this is just fascinating to me because Dr. Barta said we're going to focus on the MSAs along that corridor so that we can stay intentionally focused. So if you go to Texas and you're trying to recruit from Texas, I don't know if you've been there or not, it's a pretty big state. But if you focus on the MSAs, probably you can have enough people working there. But here's the interesting thing. If you take I-35 from the border up to Salina, and then you take I-70 from there to Kansas City, and then you throw in 335 and 35 to Kansas City and Topeka, 74% of the Kansas population lives in a county that touches that interstate. Again, getting back to infrastructure, people locate where they can move back and forth, right? So that's why we made that focus, and that's why we focus there. So everyone can have in-state tuition, and how do we bring those students here, right? And so I'll tell you, we just had our first graduating class of the people along the I-35 corridor. We were hoping to keep about 20% of those students here. And the benefit was, we thought, if they go home to Dallas and Houston and San Antonio and go to work for companies there, we'll figure out how to trade with those companies and develop a relationship, and maybe we can get a presence here as well. Well, actually, what turned out, because of our applied learning model, 49% of the graduating class from outside of Kansas stayed in Kansas. They got exposed to companies, enjoyed it, and they stayed. Number two, we have this partnership with Wichita Tech. And that's really where we can start to bring these kids who have never thought about going to school, bring them in. They may not be prepared for a four-year institution, and then start exposing them and seeing what's possible. There's so many people in this world that don't ever think about going to school, don't think they can go to school, and have come from families that you need to go work and help support the family. We don't have time, you're not going into debt. And how do we start to capture some of those students and show them that a little bit of schooling, it doesn't have to be a four-year degree, can start to make a difference in their lives. So that's the talent pipeline. Next slide is, we're again trying to stay affordable, and we can talk about need-based data at another time. And so I won't spend a lot of time on that slide, but if you go to the one that says partners, I think it's 2 slides from here. These are all the businesses that are actually located on our campus that we do applied learning with. I don't have the slide. We have a return on investment slide at the end of this, but we just came out with the new applied learning data. We had over 8,000 students doing applied learning in over 600 companies with a payroll of $28.5 million. And as you start talking about how you make school affordable, scholarships are great, jobs are good too. So, and that helps them pay to go to school. Next slide, what's the benefit to companies in doing this? Typically, it's a 24-month window for when you get hired by a company until you're profitable for that company. And a lot of companies, as we start talking about, you talk to them, the reason they don't want to hire graduates, they don't want to take those 2 years to invest in you to get you profitable. And here's the great thing. Those companies that do, and this happened to me, I went to work for a company, they were training me for 2 years, and then I found out all my friends that were working for these other companies were making more than I was, and I was pissed. I was like, the first thing I wanted to do is leave, and they waited till my training was done, and I got hired by another company. So again, these companies that are willing to make these investments know they lose out on employees because they don't have that opportunity to give you that raise at these other companies that were waiting to poach you. So internships and co-ops can reduce that to about 18 months. Applied learning model that we're talking about can reduce that to under 6 months, and in some time they can walk in the door and be profitable right away. And again, you start thinking about the savings for that company. They don't have to make that investment in training. Next slide is the Innovation Campus. Some of you have been there. Would love to have all of you come down and see what we've done with the golf course. We doubled the size of the campus. Most of it's business and industry. Really exciting things that are happening. The next slides are kind of our research labs, and I think, Mr. Chairman, you and I were talking that next week we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about those. So I'll kind of pass over those. And if we can go to the return on investment slide, which looks like this. I'll end there to end this misery of having to listen to me this long. Here's the return on investment. I talked about the first one. The first graph is our applied learning model. So you can start to see the growth when the innovation campus is being built and we bring companies here. The second are our grant awards. So in 2015, we've been pretty steady around $50 million research university. This year we're at $270 million. We just signed We just signed a $100 million contract with the Army to do all the ground transport vehicles out of Detroit. So that's a real exciting opportunity for us as well. So that's the second $100 million contract we signed with the Army to start working on research projects to help them modernize their fleet vehicles. Again, every one of those contracts bring more students to having an opportunity to work in a real-time world, making a difference for our future. And last thing, total enrollment, you can see we grew 5% last year. We've grown in the last 5 years, 12%. We are growing as we're having it harder and harder to find students that are here. We're growing, and we believe we're growing because parents and students are seeing the value of that applied learning model. And at the very bottom, you can see the shocker cities. We brought in so far about 1,400 students from outside of Kansas. And like I said, in the first graduating class, half of those stayed here. I'll stop there. I could talk forever, but I'd rather you guys get to have the questions you have answered and not the questions I have answered.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Yep. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, you talk about infrastructure, and I understand
Yep.
roads and bridges. What else infrastructure do we need to do here in Kansas?
Well, you know, to me, if companies are saying we don't know what future technology we need to invest in, and they're saying where's that workforce come from? To me, it's a digital world, right? Roads are important. I'm not hearing roads in the top 10 of companies anymore, right? I mean, they're needed. Don't get me wrong, but I do think it's this digital world. How many people in Kansas are working here and work for Apple, IBM, right? And Google? We have no idea. We don't even ask, right? How many? And so to me, it really is starting to look at this digital world. Do we have infrastructure, right? If you get into farming, and I was talking to a person at Cargill, we can improve productivity and yield if we can get real-time data to the tractor. But the real-time data, if you have to get in a pickup truck and meet at a coffee shop and then go to put it in the tractor, isn't the same as getting instantaneous data. And it does make a little bit of difference. So all of that really, I think, is where that change needs to become in the type of infrastructure we're talking about.
In Pittsburgh, again, I see a lot of businesses. First time I've ever seen Kansas City Southern advertise for workers because they can't find them. And FedEx comes to town, needs a lot of workers. And like you say, it worries me sometimes that our workforce is small. And a lot of them drive from Missouri over to Kansas, so we're right on the border and then go back. So that bothers me a little bit.
We've got to figure out the talent. We got to look and see what the need is, realize that we don't have enough people in Kansas to fill that. And, kind of, I think Representative Blue was talking about this before. There was, and I went into engineering and didn't survive, and we can talk about why I was not prepared for that. But back in the day, it was about flunking out. When we talked about it, it was about, hey, are you still doing flunk out classes, right? So it really has changed, right? If you don't have enough of something and you have somebody who wants to be an engineer and you tell them you're not good enough to be an engineer, so now we're going to go find people who don't want to be engineers to be engineers. Maybe if we spent more time with that person who had an inclination to give them some of the skill set they need to keep going, that would be better. So again, I just think we have to think about how we're doing things and be more purposeful about it. Because to your point, right now, we don't in Kansas have enough people to fill the workforce needs we have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions. First, and I remember voting on it, when did you guys affiliate with WSU Tech?
So the best part about me and the reason I keep coming back here is I forget what happened. So so I don't know if anybody knows, but it's been
17, 18?
Probably right around there. It's been 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
So my lead up question is, how different has the university changed since the affiliation?
Well, it's, the benefit, I think, is, WSU Tech and the history of WSU Tech, we had a whole, and this goes back 10, 15 years, even before I was working at the university. Industry just kind of blew up and said, we hate our tech school. You guys do not produce the talent we want. And we went through a horrible piece. And that was, again, we're going way back. That's when we were taking those tech schools out of schools, K through 12, and where do they sit? Well, industry took over the tech school. And so the tech school can't provide any programs unless that industry board tells them that's what they want done. I think that's been helpful for Wichita State as well, right? So having industry come in and say, this is what we're looking for, is not necessarily something that Wichita State wants to hear, nor do a lot of our faculty believe that they should be doing workforce training. And so how do you start to have that conversation to meet that industry need, but yet stay true to what's important to the educational values that we need to impart on our students? So it's been huge. And I think what you can see is WSU Tech has grown because of that affiliation, and now Wichita State's growing as well.
Any other questions from the committee? If not, thank you, Andy, for being here. Look forward to presentation next week as well.
Riveting.
Rivetings. Next, we'll have Kevin Schamberg. He's President Emeritus of Kansas Livestock Association. Welcome to the committee, Kevin.
Chair Howe.
Can you press the button on there? Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Howe and committee. I am, as Chair Howe said, I'm President Emeritus of the KLA Environmental Services, which is an affiliate of the Kansas Livestock Association. We are a unique technology company that was started by the Kansas Livestock Association in 2001. KLA had a need for providing engineering and technical services regarding environmental compliance to their membership, and had worked with some other engineering firms and chose to start their own company. And so I had opportunity from the startup of that company to work with Kansas Livestock Association. Our company has offices in Salina and Scott City. Scott City office has been in business for 12 years. And I think the challenges that we experience with staffing and with recruiting of engineers and other technology positions is consistent with what the universities have described. We're a unique company in that we provide services specifically to agriculture. However, as an engineering firm, we're probably pretty representative of a small consulting firm providing engineering services. So I think that will be useful too. The type of services that we provide in both our Salina office and Scott City office are primarily the design, planning, construction management, and operation of livestock waste management systems. We also work with small communities in Western Kansas on water supply systems, waste management systems. We work with small dams with Kansas watershed districts. So our focus is really on natural resources. We look like a civil engineering firm that's providing agricultural engineering. So a lot of the things we do are typical of civil engineers. We also recently began to develop technology, app-based systems for monitoring compliance and for managing data regarding environmental compliance, and have rolled that out to KLA members throughout Kansas, and has been very well received in a very effective way of managing their day-to-day compliance. So in doing that, we've worked with software developers, and I learned a little bit about app development and operations. So we employ primarily agricultural engineers, civil engineers, engineering technicians, agronomists, and compliance specialists. We have also got administrative staff in our Scott City and Salina offices. All of our technical people are licensed, either engineers or agronomists. We require engineering licenses for our leadership engineers. It's important that we have those licenses in place for working with the agencies and being able to certify compliance with their rules and regulations. So we find that important. To do that means that we're hiring engineers from ABET accredited universities. Recruiting engineers primarily is one of our biggest challenges. We have learned over the years the important ways to do that. We work closely with universities and provide internships. We included 2 apartments in the basement of our office in Scott City to overcome the lack of short-term places to live, and we found that very helpful in recruiting young engineer students. We agree that it's a good opportunity to use internships to extend the interview process. By the time we've spent a summer with a student, we have a really good feel about how they're going to fit into our organization and fit into our culture. We're really competitive with salaries, with benefits. We have strong teams that care deeply about each other and about the work that they do and the customers they serve. We're heavily involved in our communities and work really hard on these aspects to build an organization that is attractive to young people and also attractive to those that we have on staff. We found probably the most important key is the culture. I think I heard one of the university representatives mention that. I guess I would confirm that culture is primarily the thing young people look for when they look for a job ahead of salary. They're both important, but culture is really important when you're competing for a small pool of students. We've overcome these challenges and we feel good about where we're at in recruiting, but we're small and we're nimble. We only hire 1 to 2 young employees a year to fit our business plan and our turnover rate and our situation. So we're able to really focus on individuals. We see the challenges of the large firms and the agencies. One of the huge challenges we have is working with the Kansas environmental agencies, primarily KDHE and Division of Water Resources of the Department of Agriculture. And the issue that we have is their turnover and their inability to hire engineers, primarily due to the fact that they're not competitive with salaries. So what we find ourselves doing is a lot of retraining of young engineers with those agencies, delays in getting compliance permits reviewed and issued, and also revisiting resolved issues time and time again due to the staff turnovers. So one of the challenges that we see for state government and state agencies is to be competitive on salaries for engineers, to be able to recruit and retain high quality engineers for the good of the people of Kansas. So I'll conclude with that and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Kevin. Questions from the committee? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a grandson at Pittsburgh that for a couple summers went through an internship with construction management. And they put him at the bottom of the workforce and show him what they do and, work up as he goes. I was wondering, your interns, do they do that? Do they get dirty and do the hard jobs and then work up to, to a management type position, or what do they do?
We've learned how to do that. When we first started with interns, we thought it was important that they follow us around and see what we do and assist with the menial task. What we've learned is that makes our jobs as engineers much more difficult. It's really hard to have somebody following you around and try to keep them busy and productive, effective, and energized. So we began developing projects. As we work through the year, we keep a list of things, of technologies, of data, and of concepts that we need fleshed out and need to learn more about it. So we try to assign a project to a young intern that's within their capabilities, but yet is challenging to them, and give them freedom to work through that project and work closely with us as they do that. So we find that to be the most effective use of an intern.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next is Representative Rogers.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Couple questions. One, are all your professional staff graduates of Kansas universities?
Yes, either Kansas or Kansas State. We have them from both. Primarily Kansas State due to our serving agriculture. It seems to be the best fit with our culture, but we also have individuals from University of Kansas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That's my question, didn't I? Sorry about that. Habits die hard. So, you know, and I appreciate your comments, and I agree with you. And it's a struggle for us as the appropriators to find that sweet spot, if you will, for engineers. We know the issue in to me, the top issue is water and dealing with water, not only livestock production, but just in life in general. Is there a sweet spot? You talk about compensation. Where's the sweet spot? Because it seems like KDA is offering will be a very competitive mark, and we're not getting people to apply. You know why that would be?
I'm not sure I have the answer to that. We know what our sweet spot is. We really build around culture, and we are competitive with salaries. I think the numbers that the universities presented are consistent with what our expectations would be as well.
Thank you. So you have Kansas or K-State, whatever, graduates as your staff. So is there anything that the engineering schools could be doing to continue or better prepare those students, either as interns and then as you find as employees that maybe they're not getting in their college experience? Again, as technology and other things continue to evolve and change.
You know, we're getting good students. We're really selective. We have high expectations when we hire even interns, but we're getting good students. We're getting students that have a good basis of technology and fit in with us really well. I guess I wouldn't have anything to offer there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions from the committee? I do, Kevin, if I may, you do bring up a very interesting concern, and it's probably not a new one, but the fact that, you know, the state of Kansas, we employ engineers. We have them in, you cited in your testimony, KDH&E, KDA, Division of Water Resources. We have engineers in KDOT as well. I know the governor's proposed a increase in pay for state employees, but perhaps maybe we need to look at ways to target those high need areas that are costing industry delays on projects and things like that. So how bad is the turnover in your experience? I mean, is it?
You know, our experience is anecdotal, so I'm not sure I could help you understand that. But it's persistent. We just have an expectation now that we're going to be working with young, inexperienced professionals and working with those agencies. And the one that we worked with yesterday likely isn't going to be there tomorrow. And our projects are going to be delayed because of that. Or we're going to have to recover issues that have previously been resolved because of that. So although I can't give you any numbers, our experience is anecdotal, but I think it's real. And I think it's supported by the agencies as well.
For KLA Environmental Services, are you fully staffed or do you currently have openings? And I guess the next part of that is, could you expand what you're doing if you had more?
Yeah, we're small and we're nimble and we're really focused on our mission. We always have openings, but we're fully staffed. So we're always looking for good people. When you have good people, you have opportunities to move forward with your business plan. But we're also small and not wishing to grow rapidly. So,
do you have any information about what the average age of an engineer is? I hear that the average age of a farmer, I've heard that stat before, but is there something that's relatively the same across the field of engineering?
I don't know.
All right, any other questions? If not, we will thank you for joining the committee today. I look forward to working with you on some of these issues. Thank you. Next, before the committee, I'd like to welcome Matt Lindsay with the Kansas Independent College Association and Foundation. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Matt Lindsay, president of the Kansas Independent College Association. Thanks for the invitation to come back before you again today to speak specifically on the rapidly growing number of engineering students and programs at private nonprofit colleges and the importance of including them in your thinking about workforce development in Kansas. To remind you quickly of what I noted last week, KICA represents all 21 of the accredited undergraduate degree granting independent colleges, nonprofit colleges in Kansas. A note on vocabulary again, you might hear me use private, independent, nonprofit. Those are all interchangeable terms in our world, but it does not include any for-profit institutions. It is nonprofit only. Of the current 21 KIC institutions, only one right now offers bachelor's degrees in engineering. Benedictine College in Atchison has one of the fastest growing accredited engineering programs in the United States. They have ABET accreditation for mechanical, civil, electrical, and chemical engineering. You'll notice I don't have anyone from Benedictine up here to speak today. I tried to get them here, but most of their campus is in DC for the March right now. As a Catholic institution, it's a pretty important thing for them. The faculty are teaching. That's what we do. We teach. So I didn't have anybody I could get here who wasn't teaching a class or wasn't in DC. So you get to hear from me again rather than from them. But I'd be happy to put you in contact with folks at Benedictine if the need arises. As of fall of this year, there are 260 students enrolled in the engineering programs at Benedictine. In 2019, that number was 200. In just 4 years, their enrollment has grown by 30%, and their enrollment is poised for even additional growth. Their confidence is derived in part due to the nature of their program and the attractiveness it provides to students and employees and employers. And again, remember, these are ABET accredited engineering programs, just like ABET accreditation at Wichita State, just ABET accreditation at KU, ABET accreditation at K-State, ABET accreditation at Benedictine College. Benedictine College is the only engineering college in America that requires every student to pass the Fundamentals of Engineering, or FE, exam in order to graduate. There are other schools that require their students to take that exam before graduation. Only Benedictine College in the entire U.S. requires a passing grade on that exam. And that FE exam is the prerequisite to become a practicing professional engineer to get a license. That indicates, in other words, Benedictine's focus on educating engineers, educating students to enter the workforce. These are students that they want to be able to go out and get a job and work right away. The other aspect that makes Benedictine, their program, unique is that they are the only engineering school in America that requires every student pass a course in ethics and moral life. Now, I think that's an important piece because I think our society should want bridges and roads and devices and technical systems to be designed by those individuals with a keen sense of right and wrong. And Benedictine intends to have students who have that sense. The workforce nature of Benedictine's engineering program is reflected in the faculty they employ. They have 13 engineering faculty. 11 of them have significant professional practical experience in industry outside of academia. You should also note that the 13 faculty then yield a slightly less than 20 to 1 student to faculty ratio in just those classes. So you're allowed, you have smaller classes, you have personal attention. That's the point of private colleges. These elements focus on training engineers for workforce, a focus on ethics and personal attention have yielded very powerful results. Last year, they awarded 32 degrees in engineering. And over the past 4 years, they've awarded 121 degrees. They are the fastest growing ABET accredited program in the United States. So those enrollments and degrees awarded statistics are, of course, significantly smaller than the raw numbers you would see from WSU and KSU and KU. When those programs are combined, I believe their enrollment is about 6,800 students, and they awarded about 1,400 degrees. So Benedictine College, of course, only enrolls as a total about 2,300 students, and that's compared to the 50,000 students across the three Regents institutions. So engineering at Benedictine is important, is growing, is working. It's just smaller. Here's my favorite statistic they have. Of Benedictine's engineering graduates over the past 4 years, more than 90% have stayed in Kansas for their first job after graduation. Again, to reiterate the point, Benedictine is training engineers for the workforce and especially for the Kansas workforce. Now, I've focused on Benedictine in my remarks because they have the ABET accredited programs in those 4 focus areas right now. But there are several other KICA schools that are in the process of attaining ABET accreditation. They have begun to submit all their paperwork and go through all the steps, and that's a multi-year process. Friends University in Wichita, Kansas, and McPherson College in McPherson are both in that process and should, in the next couple of years, start to show additional small college engineering opportunities. The reason I bring Benedictine and those schools up is because, and you heard from my colleagues, that the Kansas created the University Engineering Initiative 12 years ago and reauthorized it a couple of years ago. That initiative only provides support to the 3 public universities of engineering. It is funded through the Department of Commerce. And the point is, even in the text of the law, it says that we want to educate and employ more engineers in the state of Kansas. Kansas's KICA's perspective would be, if that's the goal of the state, you should have us at that table. You should be including us in those efforts. That Benedictine College should be part of that because the goal of the program is to get more engineers in Kansas, and that's what Benedictine is doing. I'm hopeful that this legislature will take steps to remedy this imbalance. We've requested a bill to be introduced to make that happen in statute. We expect to see that introduced in the next week or so, and we hope you'll provide some funding to support that as well. I'm happy to talk about those questions when the time comes, but I'd be right now just happy to talk about the great things going on at Benedictine.
Any questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here. Let's see if I can find it. It says you have 13 faculty for 260 students. Now, does that include your math department?
No, that is engineering faculty only, and only the students who are declared majors in engineering.
They do have to take a considerable amount of math.
Oh, yes. They still have to take all of the courses that you would require of anyone. And if you're going to get an engineering degree, you better study a lot of math. That's right.
Atchison is my hometown. I've seen great things happen there in the last 10 years, 20 years. And I know they bring in a lot of people in from back east. And if we can bring them in from back east and take out of state money and keep them in Kansas, it's a win-win. So I'm really glad to see them do so well. So.
And they are, of that 260 students, more than half are coming from out of state. And as I said, 90% of their graduates are staying here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And I do appreciate what you guys do. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next question to Representative Woodard.
Mr. Chair, Matt, thanks for being here. Always good to see you. Question about how you came up with the $500,000 number. Just some quick math. I'm taking the $3.5 million that K-State does by their 3,000 students. That comes out to about $11.58 per student. If we did $500,000 for the 260 now, you're coming out to about $1,900, almost double what we're sending to the public. So how?
If you'll flip to the back page, the last page of your testimony, and I can do this by degrees awarded or by enrollment, and you'll see that if you look at the Regents average of those 3 schools, which is what I tried to calculate, it's not using one particular school, but all 3, and a comparison to what Benedictine's is, you're going to get right now a number that's 350,000, give or take. And as I said, that's just Benedictine, and we have friends in McPherson getting ready to go at any point. So eventually, you're going to be splitting 500,000 much thinner than anywhere else as those programs grow.
I also looked at, so this would be a state appropriation. for a program at Benedictine, the BS degree in mechanical engineering requires philosophy 3250, which is ethics. And then also this would be a state appropriation requiring a student to also take a course in Christian moral life. Are they able to take any other religions, moral life courses to meet the degree requirement?
That is a requirement for graduation of all students at Benedictine College.
This would be a state appropriation requiring a student to take that course to get this degree. That's what this would be supporting. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions from the committee? I did have one, Matt. So for those students that don't pass the FE exam, do they fall back into some sort of a sub retooling, or how many times can you take that test? And I guess how do you address those students that aren't?
And you're asking me a question that may get me well over my skis in my knowledge of the FE exam. I believe you can take it multiple times. What Benedictine makes sure to do, and this goes back to something Representative Smith asked, these students have enough credits to have a second major in mathematics. They're not going to be non-graduates. They just won't be engineering graduates.
I would be interested to see if they, to learn more about that. I was just kind of curious for background information. Any other questions from the committee? Oh, yeah, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Woodard may have asked this question. I don't hear well, so forgive me. But the course they take in ethics and moral life, does every student on campus take that class?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There's no other questions. We'll move on down the agenda, but Matt, thank you for being before the committee today. So what I wanted to do with today's meeting and presentations is to not only talk about the University Engineering Initiative, but also to talk about workforce. But we had to kind of narrow the focus to engineering because of time, really. There's other things in higher education that we have initiatives on, whether it's nursing, the medical field, and things like that. So, and also getting the perspective of someone in the ag engineering field, I think is important, just being a huge ag state and the importance of agriculture on our economy. Moving forward, we do have a schedule that's been issued for next week, or a weekly agenda, which has us meeting Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Hopefully everybody's got that in your inbox. If not, it will be posted on the website under our committee. But on Tuesday of next week, we're having a presentation from the Midwest Higher Education Compact. Wednesday, we'll have a presentation about the task force, community and technical college and state funding, which was a task force that was an interim committee that met. And they do have some recommendations, not only for Board of Regents, but for the legislature. And then also Thursday will be a presentation from some presenters about the economic impact of research at our universities and higher ed institutions. As well as I did get the report out schedule in which we'll have to report out budgets. So I will send that electronically once I get to a computer, but we have the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board for the 13th of February. That's the deadline. And then the Kansas State Board of Healing Arts is on February 13th. Then on the 14th is the State Historical Society and the State Library. I've been given a deadline for the Regents, or the post-secondary education system, March the 9th. So that's kind of our target dates. I'll get that email to you so you can have it and put it on your calendars. But we will start gearing up the next couple weeks in going over some of these budgets. Does anybody else have anything for the good of the order? Any announcements? If not, it concludes today's meeting. Thank you for joining us.